Hello and welcome to episode 21 of Audiovisual Cultures, the podcast that explores and examines different areas and aspects of sound and image-based cultural production. This week I'm really excited to say that we've been watching The Florida Project, and I think it's probably my favourite film of 2017 out of what I saw. We seem to have a dominance so far of looking at different areas of girlhood and transgressive behaviours in girlhood, so I think that this will emerge quite a bit more in the discussion. Thank you so much for everybody who's supporting, whether that's on social media through shares and likes or listening to the podcast. Please do consider supporting us on Patreon. It really helps. I'll be back at the end with a bit more information, so for now I really hope the discussion is useful. Enjoy. Dr. Shail.
It's good to see you again, Dr. Blair. It's been a while.
So that was pretty exhilarating. We've just watched The Florida Project. I think out of all the films I saw in 2017, that is my favourite. I treated myself for my birthday. It came out in November 2017 in the UK. It was my birthday treat to myself to go and see it, and I loved every second of it, and I really enjoyed just watching it there again and being able to pay more attention to details. What did you think of it?
It actually reminded me of a little Mark Commode thing I saw today where he talked about times when he'd been tired and had inadvertently fallen asleep in films for just a little bit. Because there was one moment there where I thought, oh, this thing is not keeping me awake. But it was late and I've had a long day and I had just eaten. So no bad report on the film. But also I suppose it's an indictment on how accustomed I've become to films that do not let up. Whereas that film was the slowest build in tension. So it violated so many norms. I'm accustomed to films that operate according to those norms. And here I am actually like having indigestion watching a film that doesn't stick with those norms. So open mind, it grew on me.
That's interesting. I think this is the sort of film structure, a fairly loose narrative. It's chronological, but it's not the 3-act structure. I prefer films like that. I can sink into them like they're a warm bath. I'm just captivated by all of the characters and everything they're doing, because it captures that sense of, you know, if you think back to your childhood summers, and in Northern Ireland the summers are very long because we've got longer school holidays than you have here in England. It reminds me of that, is the length of the summer and the just sketchiness of memory, because it is quite episodic and it is shown in little vignettes, because that's what your experience is as a child, I think, during a long summer. But then the context here is much different to what we're used to.
We ought to run through the characters whose company we've just been in for the past something like an hour and 50 minutes.
Yeah.
Our main character, Hayley.
Yeah, well, I think Mooney's the main character.
Okay, yeah. There I'm going our main character, meaning our main adult character. But yeah, of course, the protagonist
carried
is
by a 6-year-old girl, yeah.
She does a range of things that might be called acting. There's quite a few points. It's just her being filmed doing completely what comes naturally after clearly quite a lot of time getting used to there being a camera around so she can ignore it. And then there's acting moments when she's been given a line to deliver and she's going to do that line no matter how unsuitable it seems for that moment. And then there's the bit right near the climax where she has to do some emotion, and it seemed like a child acting. But you know, I suppose if you're trying to get a 6-year-old to act, and what you're trying to get them to act is something where if you were to do it for real, you'd actually have to scare the child. Acting completely fine and completely acceptable.
You have a 6-year-old daughters, and how many times have you witnessed her cry in that way? It's a cry for help and you can't articulate. She literally says, I can't say it. I literally haven't got the words. There's just this cry from her boots coming out of her. Of course it's a bit contrived because she's a small child and you don't want to traumatise her in a film set, but also that's how children cry. They're crying because they're still coming out of that baby phase where they haven't got the words to communicate their pain, to communicate the complicated thing and the horrible thing that's going on in their lives. All they can do is cry. That's their only mode of communication. So that in itself is a performance. When a child does it for real, it is a form of acting. I'm going to defend this film
sure.
with all of my being, because I love it. I love it because it's got so much merit in it, and I think it's very easy to misunderstand these characters. So the characters we have spent time with, Mooney's in the fault line between victim and perpetrator, as is her mother, Hayley. I think this is where a lot of people struggled with the film, was that they couldn't really get behind these characters because they're morally reprehensible in many ways. And Mooney you can forgive to an extent because she's only 6, but her mother, a lot of people just thought she's basically trailer trash but living in one of these projects. And then we need to discuss the title then as well, the Florida Project, and the significance of that, because that's what Disney was called when it was being built in secret originally.
Okay, yeah, about the environment. This is an environment that I've been to a couple of times. So this is Walt Disney World, which is the one in Florida, as distinct from Disneyland, which is the one in Anaheim, just outside Los Angeles.
So maybe you can speak to an extent, not fully, but to an extent, to the white middle class men who are holidaying in this part of the world.
You mean the ones who are using the main adult female characters as sex workers? To
an extent. I'm not accusing you of that, but you are someone who has had the mobility and access to be able to go to this place.
There's an English guy at one point in there. That guy who buys the park copper bands, magic bands as they're called, off Hayley. And there's the similarity.
I mean, obviously there's more to it than your experience, but you have done it, and it's something that I've never in my life been able to do, nor would I have the inclination. But that's beyond the question. I think when you can't access something, it doesn't really matter if you wouldn't do it or not, whereas you have been able to go there for whatever reason.
I'd never go again. It wasn't never really my choice to go.
But your experience is useful here, because I haven't done it. In the United States, the project is a kind of what we would call a housing estate for working class and underclass people who are kept on the periphery of society. And just this polarisation between them and the excessive wealth and mobility of Disney World and everything to do with that.
See, my understanding was that the place they're staying at, which is called the Magic Castle, is a motel which has weekly rates.
Yes, that's right.
So what she was doing was she was staying at a place which is just a cheap hotel, but staying there long term because they do a deal for people who will be a long term resident because they're a sure source of income. According to various descriptions of the film, it is in Kissimmee, which is something like 4 miles southeast of the southeastern corner of the Walt Disney World property. So what we're looking at here is the Walt Disney World project begun, I think it was in the 1980s, took a long time to build it, and it was specifically begun in Florida, and it specifically begun quite quietly, because the Disney company, having set up Disneyland in Anaheim in California, they had inadvertently created a huge tourist attraction and not themselves taken the opportunity to cash in on, when I say they inadvertently created the tourist attraction, they'd inadvertently missed out on the opportunity to cash in on the service industry stuff that would always orbit the tourist attractions. So they set up these parks, and there's some accommodation in and around these parks, but there's nowhere near enough room there for them to establish all the many hotels and apartments, all the various sorts of accommodation you can stay at when you go for a holiday. Because as soon as they started to build it, other companies started to buy up the land around it and build hotels there. So a lot of the staying at a hotel to go to the Disneyland complex involves putting money in the pocket of a company that isn't Disney, whereas Disney World specifically set up to avoid that, so they built a massive area with loads of land around it into which they could expand later on, and no one else could build inside that property. But then of course what happened was that in spite of the fact that Disney's been constantly, since Walt Disney World opened, building more and more accommodation inside the master property, it is still quite expensive. And so outside it, and there's the really defined boundary of where Walt Disney World begins and ends, outside it there are circles of hotels that are still built by companies that aren't Disney, and the further out you get, the less and less expensive these places get, until you get to these places like the city, according to Google Maps, of Kissimmee. And it's basically, we talk about Walt Disney World as being in Orlando, Florida, but actually it's quite some distance from Orlando, and it's nearer to this little city called Kissimmee. As you would expect with such an enormous mound of tourist gravity set just a few miles away, Kissamee's been utterly changed. That's one thing that comes across very clearly in the film. This is an environment which is set up just to provide very peripheral services for tourists going to Disney World. Sean Baker quite niftily had that bit where somebody turns up, he's been taken there by cab, he thinks he's being taken to a hotel which is actually inside the parks, but his assistant did the booking, she made a mistake, or deliberately has messed him up and sent him this motel called the Magic Castle, thinking, oh, that must be somewhere inside the parks, because all of this peripheral stuff, it just dusts itself with a little bit of Disney pretense.
Yeah, I think it was very notable actually that his wife is Brazilian. The name of the assistant, I think it was Juan was the assistant, so you're saying she, but I think it was a guy.
Oh, okay.
It's likely that, well, this person is of the Hispanic Portuguese world as well, so you could be right, it could be a bit of subterfuge going on there, because this Brazilian wife gets really upset about what's happening. In the short amount of time they're in the film, so much about their story is revealed. They're not of that world, very clearly. They're wealthy, she's from a wealthy family, and Brazil itself is incredibly polarised. A city like Rio de Janeiro, I'm saying this with a degree of authority because I did my PhD with somebody from there and she told me all about it. You're either really very wealthy or you're living in slums. People build houses on the sides of the hills with corrugated iron, with scrap, bits and pieces from everything. The kids run about trying to wash cars for the rich people. People are living in abject poverty right beside incredibly wealthy people. So she's coming from that environment, going to another version of that environment in Florida.
And the trauma for her is that this is someone, it's very mentioned just a couple of times, she's been to Disney World quite a few times before.
Yeah.
The trauma for her is she didn't think that it would actually be part of this exactly the same setup, or in a rough equivalent.
Because all of that's hidden away, and these people are so far on the periphery that they don't really exist. And of course the kids, it's a game to them to try and get tips off people. That's what they've learned, is to try and hustle people for money, because the parents are broke. They've seen their parents do it. They use their childhood cuteness to try and get tips and hustle money off people. And that's making this woman even more upset, because it's not the magical world of fakeness and happiness that she wants to be in.
And Walt Disney World is quite the bubble. It's even more exclusive of someone just wandering in than they make out in the Florida project, because if you want to go into one of these resorts that's inside the Walt Disney World complex, there's security gates at the door. They're like these gated communities. A couple of corrections. It was opened in 1971. It is nearly 101 square kilometres in size, the entire complex. I'm dwelling on this just because we've just finished watching it, and of course the ending involves Mooney and Jancy running off together, Mooney knowing that she's about to be taken into care, and running off together to the Magic Kingdom, which is the oldest part of Walt Disney World. It's got the Sleeping Beauty Castle in the middle. It's the epicentre of their locale, and running what seems to be like 4 or 5 miles to get there.
Shown in fast motion. It's really frenetic how it's filmed. Handheld fast motion.
Walt Disney World is present throughout this film. It has this pull. It's present in the sense that people are scamming each other over park passes. She seems to go into Walt Disney World and try and sell perfume to people as they're coming in and out of the Disney-owned resorts. There's signs in the background all the time. Of course, everything has a slightly... things like, one of them's just a grocery store. It's got itself set up to look like it's got a wizard on top of it. So everything's just slightly Disney, well outside the complex. The fact that it's such a strong presence throughout the film, even to the extent that it motivates the owner of the motel where it all takes place, which is called the Magic Castle, to paint it pink. It's the colours.
Quite bright purple, that one. Yeah, everything's really vivid colours, and the film was filmed with Technicolor, which makes it even more vivid and garish, so it gives it that Disney-like surface, which is what they're going for.
So therefore, with this Disney presence throughout, there's going to be a point at which they go to Disney World.
They actually, it's all about their transgressiveness. These girls, they transgress their way through.
There was just one tiny moment of when a suspension of disbelief is required.
Yeah.
In that, to get into the Magic Kingdom, you have to
Yeah.
go through turnstiles.
Well, that's the thing,
So-
because it's quite a fantasy moment, and it's a turning point because the film is quite observational. It's almost like observational documentary a lot of
Yeah.
the time in the way it's filmed, and then very suddenly Mooney's being taken away from her mother. Her instinct is to run to her best friend, and there's a really interesting disjunction between the friendship that Hayley has with Ashley, Scooty's mother, because they're painted as very close at the beginning, and then they fall out and they don't communicate, whereas Mooney and Jancy build up throughout the film this really close, tight girlhood friendship that seems unbreakable, and it's Mooney's instinct to run to Jancy when everything goes wrong and it seems impossible and she's going to be taken away. She's saying, I can't say it, I can't say it. Jancy doesn't need her to say it, so there is a breakdown in communication with them as well, but they break through in terms of Jancy just knows what to do. The whole time through their friendship, Mooney has been the dominant one, and then Jancy takes the lead. Actually, after that, probably with the confidence that she's been given from Mooney, she takes her by the hand and they run, and it's quite fantastical. It's jarring in a good way. It goes from being very realist and things are happening in real time to this fast motion, frenetic running right across the city, and then suddenly they're in the grounds of the Magic Kingdom and they're heading straight for that castle. So Mooney's gone from the Magic Castle to the Magic Castle in that sense, so she comes full circle.
For me, at least, there was quite a sense of release at that moment.
Yeah.
Tension had built and built and
Yeah.
built gradually, but still built throughout the film. I couldn't help myself empathising to a degree with these two main characters, Mooney included, and thinking there's something at stake here. There is something for her to lose by being taken into care. At that moment when Jancy just went boom, and then it suddenly switched into fast motion, and everything was suddenly in focus, which was not the case with most of the film thus
No,
far.
there's a lot of rack focusing, there's a lot of soft focus.
Extremely shallow focus
Yeah.
at certain points.
Seeing it for the second time, I could see ways that they were protecting the children. Technology's moved on so much that I think there was a lot of superimposition, but it doesn't look like superimposition. It's done really well in the edit, particularly the part with the violence where Hayley assaults Ashley. They have it as if Scooty is watching in horror, but I think they filmed him separately. They haven't actually had the little boy standing and watching Hayley assaulting Ashley, and he's standing in horror and watching it closely the second time round. I'm pretty sure that his image is superimposed into the foreground and they're quite blurred, so you're seeing it from his point of view. You're seeing this horror happen to his mum, and then I think there's a similar bit not long after that. The same technique is used when Hayley starts to stamp on the floor because Ashley's directly underneath her. Mooney's in the bed, quite in the distance, in soft focus. She's blurred. She starts to wake up and get agitated when Hayley's at the front stamping. I think they've kept them separate as well, so I think there's been measures in place to protect the children while filming. They've got around it in those ways.
It did occur to me there were certain points where I thought the planes look really different here, not just the difference you get from one plane being in focus and another not being in focus. You're much more perceptive than I am.
Yeah, it didn't pick up on it the first time round. I think it's the benefit of seeing it for the second time. You can notice these sorts of techniques. I think especially after Room and listening to Lenny Abramson talking about how they dealt with all the horrific things they had to do with Justin Tremblay, isn't it? The ways that they got him to do that incredible performance but protecting him at the same time. I didn't really watch many, and there were some amazing interviews, I think, with Brooklyn's her first name, the girl who plays Mooney.
Brooklyn Prince. And the little boy in Room was Jacob
Tremblay. I didn't watch very many interviews. I don't know why. I think I couldn't handle how cute they were. There's extras on the DVD, so it might be worth checking out to see if there's any particular techniques. It'd be cool to hear Sean Baker talk. I'm dying to see Tangerine, which was out a couple of years before that, and it's about trans women. I think that was filmed entirely with an iPhone 5 with an extension on it. So I'm really interested in looking more deeply at his filming techniques and the idea of transgressiveness in terms of both filming something and the stories that are being told and the characters and female and womanly transgression, girlhood transgression.
He has done several features before Tangerine,
Right.
but very limited release independent films. Let's just pause for a moment on just how American this dramatis personae is, because we've talked about the main character Mooney and her mum Hayley, and her mum Hayley's initially friend Ashley and her son Scooty. And then Mooney and Scooty meet Jancy early on in the film.
Yeah, and their other friend who leaves early on, he's called Dickie, I think. It's all wise.
And this is
reminds me of home.
Yeah. A lot of this is about people just coming and going, these people's lives being highly transitory. And then we're not done, because Jancy's carer is her grandmother, whose name is Stacey.
Yeah.
And then the Willem Dafoe character, who is quite endearing, I think.
I think he's great. Yeah. There's so much unseen. We see his labour, but the residents don't see his labour, and there's so much extra labour that he does for them.
Yeah, and his name is Bobby.
Bobby!
So we've got Ashley, Scooty, Stacey, Jancy, Hayley, Mooney, Dickie and Bobby. Those two characters.
Gloria stands out. Then Gloria is the woman who is insisting on somebody being topless, and the kids all make fun of her.
This film does
female transgressiveness.
The film does score highly for kook. Characters have much kook, and it's associated with them living hand to mouth. It's associated with them all having pasts that they'd rather forget and being under high stress situations. Let's dwell for just a moment, shall we, on stylistics. Because we've mentioned there's a lot of shallow focus, there's lots of letting things happen in the out of focus plane at any one moment, and that's often such that the focus remains on a child and what they're looking at remains out of focus. That goes hand in hand with, as you observed, wide-angle lenses, because they have quite a shallow depth of field, and there's quite a few shots where the wide-angle lens is quite extremely wide-angle lenses, so the distortion is really evident with horizontal lines top and bottom of the frame,
really bulging,
really curving. Quite a few shots where there's a particular sort of following shot. It's a handheld camera and the camera operator is walking along behind the character. In places that would be a version of that where the coverage would intercut with coverage from exactly the same setup, so moving a handheld camera, or the operator's in front of the character backing away. They're highly subjective shots, but not subjective in the sense of it's a point of view shot, just ones which go, we're going to concentrate on what this character is doing in reaction to what they're seeing, frequently not show you what they're seeing. And on quite a few points take quite some time before revealing what's behind the camera. I suppose one of the big moments was when the residents at the Magic Castle noticed that there's some condos half a mile away were on fire. There was quite a lot of them, lots of people looking, and the camera just going, no, we're not going to show you this building on fire. Same thing with the guy who was bothering the kids. And this is quite episodic. We learn just a little bit more and then a little bit more about people, and they improve slightly as characters. So the guy bothering the kids, it's not overtly stated at any point what anyone suspects he is. Bobby just gets angry and puts a lot of effort into making sure he voluntarily walks away from the kids before then getting quite aggressive with them. A lot of that was just him looking into off-screen space. It took a long time before he then got to a point where the coverage of him would include the guy who he was trying to protect the kids from.
Yeah, because it's set up so that you're actually following the kids into the picnic area and they're playing. It sets up that Bobby is up on a ladder, he's painting because he's constantly doing maintenance to this place. He's the manager, but he's doing all the odd jobs as well. He's doing all the cleanups, and then there's even a sort of back and forth with his slightly estranged son a couple of times. So it's a whole other dimension, and it's constantly building up the character of Bobby, really fleshing him out. But then while he's doing the painting, he's seeing this man approach the kids. It all seems innocent at first. This man seems to just be looking around, and that's the thing, but you do get a sense of why is he going straight to this bunch of kids that are playing in this area. There's no other adults around, and it's just built up, as you say, really slowly. I think there's a lot of set pieces, or a lot of seeds are planted earlier on and they just pull through eventually. You don't know whether it's days or weeks, but things just pull through at some point. But this is is quite a tight little unit of time and space, this one part.
It's a way of showing that Bobby does have the safety, at least, of the people around him.
Yeah, he does,
at heart,
yeah.
Even though he's constantly bothering them for money.
He's very mindful of the kids. He's fed up with them. He'll put the foot down eventually, but when Mooney and Jancy are hiding from Scooty, he doesn't quite let them, but he doesn't throw them out either when they insist on going underneath his desk. And they feel safe enough around him to do that, for these two little girls to go underneath his desk and sit by his legs and mess with his computer wires. And this is even after they've shut off the electricity for the whole complex, and he's had to deal with that, and he knows it's them because he sees them on the CCTV and that sort of thing, and so he never really gets angry at them, so he gets a bit fed up, but he seems to care for them. He's like everybody's father or uncle or whatever. He will not tolerate certain behaviours. He turns a blind eye to Hayley getting into sex work to try and survive, but he absolutely will not have the suspicion of somebody who might be a suspected paedophile, and that's distinguished from a child sex offender because we don't know anything about this character who's come in, but there is this strong suggestion that he's interested in the kids in an unnatural way.
That may have been one of those points where the film was going, this guy is clearly mentally ill, and that's associated with him posing a danger to the kids. This may be something which those people who suffer from mental illnesses are just tired of, because the primary thing that we tend to learn now about mental illness is that if you're mentally ill, if you are an increased danger to anyone, you're an increased danger to yourself rather than to other people. So this idea that we've all grown up with for centuries of people who are mentally ill are dangerous, pose a threat to the general population, is just wrong. So for them to associate a guy who poses a threat to kids with someone who's very clearly mentally ill.
Why are you getting that from?
It was the fact that he seemed to talk like a child himself. He seemed to talk in a very kind of hesitating, slurry way, like somebody with quite severe learning difficulties, for
I
example.
suppose, but I picked it up that he was rumbled.
And that's why he was...
Because he's lying. Yeah, that's what I picked it up as. Not that I didn't get any sense that this man might be sick, but that he might be predatory.
Okay.
But either way, I think Bobby can't take the risk. He witnesses this guy, and it's just, he goes through the logic actually, because he says, oh, what are you doing here? And the guy says, I was looking for a soda. Well, that's not somebody who's mentally ill. That's somebody who's being calculating and trying to cover their tracks. And then Bobby said, oh, why were you talking to a bunch of kids in a green area? There's no vending machines there. So this guy's been rumbled and he's trying to act innocent. That's why he's mumbly and nervous.
This is how great my ability to read people is.
Well, it hadn't occurred to me that it could be something like that. It seemed fairly... because it doesn't accuse him directly of anything. But Bobby... It's a bit... You see, I got it that Bobby's been doing this job a very long time, and he can recognise what's going on by the movements of people and what's happening.
Just an editorial aside here, I think it'd probably be worth revisiting that scene and looking at it in more detail, because Andrew might also be onto something. And of course, mental ill health is something that's not obvious, and it's probably played quite subtly by the actors as well. It could be a mixture of paranoia. So I stand by what I've said to a degree, but I concede that I think Andrew might also be onto something, that there could be a more extreme form of paranoia. I think watch it for yourselves and see what you reckon.
The film does do a very good job of having really long duration shots which are composed so that something happens in the frame while the shot's following Bobby, where it's just made just about sufficiently evident that there's this thing which he should notice, and then the shot shows him noticing it. And it seemed to be when Hayley was letting somebody out of her room that he noticed this, and it was quite late in the day. It wasn't clear at all there that that was Hayley, but actually it was the right floor and it was the right part of the
suggestion.
place. So it seems to be,
and he seems to be keeping an eye out for them the whole time.
One of the ways in which this film remains seriously understated is the mood Mooney in the bath while Hayley's
That builds up
having
over
sex.
time.
I think it's 3 separate scenes, which are just scenes of composed of one
Just her
shot
in the bath.
of Mooney in the bath.
With the really loud hip hop.
Yeah, and then the second time I thought, I think there's something here where we're supposed to suspect what's going on behind the camera, and what's going on behind the camera is outside the bathroom. Hayley's doing something, and my guess was that she's doing, is it a live cam thing where a woman would just strip naked or do things for people watching on the internet.
She sold the iPad by then.
Yeah, that's how good I'm at working plot out. And then of course the next scene, it was just the much more simple, oh, she's just having people around and paying for sex.
And then it makes sense of the swimsuit selfies. There's this constant using of the children to do something untoward.
I had kind of thought, she's deliberately doing something to do a photo of herself in a swimsuit for some sort of purpose. I hadn't worked out what it was at that point, of course. The implication there, I suppose, is she didn't need to get Mooney to also dress up in a swimsuit and participate in taking these selfies as a cover for taking just one of just herself for her to use for this. Either she's mixing her parenting with her sex work in a really, really inappropriate way, or just wants to make every part of her life as fun as possible for her daughter. And there were quite a few moments where that latter was quite emphasised.
It's partly that, but yes, she needed somebody else to take a full body photograph of her.
Yeah, so I suppose it was her.
Because she builds up to them taking separate photos of each other.
And that was in line with several of the things that happened in this film. That was her just doing what she had to do in order to pay the
but
rent.
you're right, I think she does make everything really fun, and she is constantly encouraging her daughter and her daughter's friends to express themselves. She never tells them, oh, don't dance like that, or you need to cover that up, or you need to wear this. She's letting them be themselves and express themselves. Like every dance move they make, she's encouraging them. Whatever you think of that, she is encouraging, and she tries to make everything a game. The first time, very early on, when the first group of kids gets together, they go and they start spitting on Stacey's car. When they're made to clean it up, they make it into a game. They make it fun for themselves, and they manage to, in doing that and making it fun, they get Jancy to join in and become part of their group. There's something important socially going on there. Fun things as a form of communication and expression. But yes, it's a very transgressive style of parenting. That game thing comes in when she's trying to hawk the perfume, and also in bullying other people. So when she tries to harass Ashley at her work in the diner, it's made into a game, and Mooney is the focal point of that. Her mum knows what Mooney likes. She says, oh, I know you want a burping competition. So she gets this child to burp in front of all these paying customers and Ashley's colleagues. Hayley's transgressions are being channeled through her child.
I did find myself at several points going, is Mooney just permanently out of school? Because this is taking place over quite a lot of time. Florida, hot, but Florida's hot all year round. That doesn't mean it's the summer.
It's established very early on that they're all on summer holidays.
Oh, okay.
You really didn't get that.
Not the entirety of it. It took place just in the summer holidays.
It just feels like this is a block of several weeks of time. That's what I got from it. It's like this is over the summer months. One of the first things Hayley says when Stacey is angry about the car, she says, what? They're on holidays. What do you want to happen? Somebody says at one point, why aren't these kids in school? It's the summer holidays. It's said a couple of times quite early on.
Oh, yeah, I just wondered if it extended into the point when the school year was supposed to start again, and therefore if Mooney was ever in school.
If you think about the timescale, it shows you about a month of their lives, because it's established, right, this is their life, this is where they're living, this is how they live, and then roughly halfway through the film you get the whole he's under pressures to not allow any of the residents to claim permanent residency or long-term residency. So every month it turns out he has this arrangement with another place, and they do this for each other, where the resident moves on for one night before coming back for another 4 weeks. And that's roughly at the halfway point of the film. It feels like you're getting a month in the lives of these people, and that this is just the sort of thing that happens in this particular project, shall we say.
Okay, yeah, I hadn't thought about that.
But yeah, the camera's never intrusive. It's always sat quite far back and watching from a distance. But it's the audio that's interesting, because the audio, I find, is usually aligned with the children. It reminds me, actually, so there's a few things. There's a kind of Tom and Jerry thing where sometimes the adults' shoulders and heads aren't shown.
Yeah.
There's also quite an Italian neo-realist thing of the cameras being at the level of the eyes of the children. It's level with them, it's never looking down on them, and sometimes it's looking up at the adult characters as if from a child's point of view. When Bobby saves the day and gets the electricity back on so people can have their TVs and their ICs back on, the tracking shots from underneath him while he's walking.
I call it R2D2 height.
In this context, it's child height, it's 6-year-old child height.
This may rank as one of those films which is maybe not entirely, but is predominantly focalised in kids, even to the extent that when the kids aren't around, the narrator takes on the characteristics of kids, and that would be one way in which that happens, is just default camera height.
It's that, and it's again that narrative structure of it's linear, but it's sketchy, and it's episodic, because you're like, oh, and that day that happened, and then that day all that happened, and then that morning this loads of stuff happened, and then nothing happened for weeks, and then this happened. There's all these lapses, ellipses of time, I suppose, in editing of the whole film, the narrative structure.
And that's even done within scenes as well.
Yeah.
Because the bit when they go to one of the many resorts inside Disney World, and they just take loads of food from the buffet and they just sit down as if they're staying there. Their meeting is almost entirely shot with one long take of Mooney eating. That's the one that's extremely shallow focus.
Yeah, and there's quite a lot of jump cuts in that.
It's at least 5 jump cuts, I think, and it's simply jumping in the sense of it's a temporal jump, because 10 seconds of time has been taken out.
This is at I think it was called the Calypso Hotel, and there was Calypso music playing as they walk towards it. So they're essentially stealing someone's breakfast when they do this, because of course Haley is asked for the room number, and she doesn't lie, she gives her room number, and it is her room number, 323. She knows she can get away with it. It's interesting because she's treated with disdain in the diner, but there she seems to just, there's no reaction, that you just hear a voice from the off-screen space asking for a room number, and it's quite even, and she's wearing a cap that says, "Can we smoke weed in here?" And she has no bra on, so everything's kind of hanging out. So as you say, you've got this broken long take on Mooney/Brooklyn, because there's a collapse between the actor and the character in that.
It seems to be a big feature of films where the main character is a kid, is going, I think we'll just have this scene completely improvised. My mistake, it's called the Calypso Inn, it's independently owned, it's not part of Disney World, but it's definitely upmarket.
It's definitely somewhere where you get a big buffet breakfast. Yeah. She's eating all this great food, and she's commenting on the food, and she's having all these ideas that kids have. It's her imagination. It's like they set her down and say, look kid, just whatever you can come up with, say it. They put the most outlandish things and the most 6-year-old things that she could say. Whatever way she moves, the focus racks to her face.
Those automatic focus racks, they can look unprofessional because it makes it clear that something is happening. Because what happens is you move backwards a bit, and after a second later the camera racks focus, rather than it being choreographed. So that there's a focus puller who's there going, okay, and second 8, then I have to rack to that focus.
And it racks a bit too far and it has to go back.
But I suppose that's part of the implicit child narrator of this.
Again, that scene, it seems very disconnected, and looking at it on its own, it seems disconnected. And then Haley's not eating. When it does cut to her, she's just watching her daughter having fun and getting a good meal. They walk back to their own room in silence. It feels like Haley knows, because the DCF, so their equivalent of social services, they've already been called out because she assaulted Ashley, so Ashley, we assume, has reported her. Haley knows that her time's limited, and she just wants to make sure her daughter has a good meal and a fun morning, because she doesn't know when she'll see her again after this. There's times when you think she's a terrible parent, she's a disgrace in society, and yes, she'll be transgressive and she'll steal someone else's breakfast, but she'll do what it takes to provide for her child.
That moment when, at the climax, Mooney manages to run off and Hayley realises this, and there's loads of, what's DCF stand for? Department for Children and Families, people between her and her daughter as she's running off, and she's shouting at them going, and you're criticising my parenting, you've just let my kid run off.
Yeah.
There were several moments of her quite righteously experiencing indignation, and part of that was the day or two leading up to then, when she just seems to go, obviously I'm losing you at some point, very soon, let's just spend some time together.
There's almost like a cleansing ritual where there's very heavy rains. After she assaults Ashley, she's been out in the rain. Mooney asks her, why are you all wet? Then it cuts to them dancing in really heavy rain together.
And there's a jump cut as well. There's these scenes joined by jump cuts.
Well, it's not a jump cut when that happens. It's a cut that jumps. A jump cut is when you take out parts from a continuous shot.
Well,
if it jumps from one scene to another, that's just a cut.
Should we do this? Let's do this.
What are you going to do? Are you going to mansplain to me what a jump cut is?
If a jump cut is an edit which is either spatially or temporally discontinuous, then any edit between one scene and the next is, I admit, technically a jump cut, and we don't tend to call edits between one scene and the next a jump cut. But the jump doesn't necessarily need shot A and shot B to be part of one take. A jump cut can be someone in shot A goes to sit down.
Then every cut is a jump cut if you're going to use that logic.
No, I'm nearly there. If in shot A you got a person going to sit down and then midway through them going through the act of sitting down, we have an edit. So it's a classic match on action. Okay, we're going to have another shot which is going to be probably closer and probably lower down to show them finishing the act of sitting down. If you have that arrangement, except that shot B starts when they've already sat down, that's temporarily discontinuous, and that counts as a jump cut because there's an expectation of continuity there, and that's been violated by the jump cut. Now, the same thing tends to happen with the way some of these scenes begin and end.
Is that not just disjunctive editing rather than a jump cut? A jump cut is disjunctive, but disjunctive is a more umbrella term for those kinds of edits.
Well, I suppose it's time to check definitions.
Take it back to Bordwell and Thompson. This has derailed everything. There's more important issues at hand.
There's nothing more important.
There's so much more important than you trying to tell me what a jump cut is.
I'll have to do an entire subsequent podcast on types of edit.
Anyway, before I was derailed in a mansplaining way.
I spent my entire life this decade trying not to do something that could be regarded as mansplaining. That was not at all mansplaining.
Well, we'll let the listeners judge that. So there's a kind of cleansing that happens in that rain shower.
And we're talking here about a tropical part of the world.
Yeah, it's proper monsoon downpours, isn't it?
Yeah, big rain.
There's that, and then immediately after that it shows you them cleaning the room, and again they make it into a game. Hayley does designate cleaning because she sends Mooney outside and says that's your hand marks from all the times you've crawled in through the window. They make it into a game again to clean the room. Things like even her doing the laundry, just on that theme as well. People either ignoring her, the woman in the laundrette. Hayley, it's almost like a goodbye present. She gives her all the rest of her weed and doesn't seem to want anything in return, which is odd for Hayley. I think she's just getting rid of it. She's cleansing, and she knows that the DCF they're coming back, so she's just trying to get rid of it. And the woman hugs her, and Hayley's got a WTF face on her when you see the reverse shot, because this woman's saying it's going to be okay, it'll be okay, and Hayley's like, why do these people pity me? It's just the look on her face what says that. She's just not interested in their pity. Or
I did wonder, it seemed to be one of those moments where she's reassuring her everything's going to be okay, and it seemed that Hayley was thinking, well, at least that Hayley's bemusement was in part, what does she know that I don't know?
Yeah.
What makes her think that everything is going to be okay? Has she been through this experience before? Has she lost a kid to the DCF?
She's sort of thinking, how do you know anything about me? But then Hayley's come to the end of the road with some stuff, and she needs some money. She and Ashley had a sort of relationship before where she could tap her for money, and that's gone now. So she turns up at Ashley's, claiming at first, oh, we shouldn't let the kids get in the way of our friendship, well, she should have said that weeks ago. They didn't communicate with each other. Ashley, of course, blames Hayley for Mooney setting fire to things that could potentially get her son in trouble. And he's the one who found the lighter, but he's been honest with his mum and said they set fire to the stuff because it wasn't actually him. He found the lighter.
Oh, was it him who actually set fire to that big pillow?
I thought it was one of the girls, because they call out, "We need your lighter." Or maybe they tell him to do it.
It's one of these...
I can't remember now.
It's one of these, a bunch of kids collectively just egg each other on and decide to do a thing.
It's almost quite innocent, actually, because these condominiums, they've been lying derelict for years, it looks like, and it looks like they've had squatters in them, because there's debris, there's pillows, the duvets, there's just stuff around, there's pictures that have been hanging there on the floor, everything's broken. They just go in and start smashing up the place for fun. They're stuffing a pillow into a fireplace, so they're actually in a way doing the safe thing, but maybe it says a lot about how unsafe these places were, that they just went up, and how dry the environment is as well. They just went up in flames. The whole house went up in flames, even though they put something and set fire to it in the fireplace, which should have been safe. So the kids, in a way, yes, they were really irresponsible, but they also, in a way, didn't quite do anything wrong. They did it in the proper way, if that makes sense.
They also burnt down a property that would need to be demolished
soon
anyway.
They probably did the state a favour, almost. And they gave people a lot of entertainment. They turn up and Hayley says, "Oh, this is better than TV." It's entertaining for them. It's something to look at. It's something to do because it's different.
She's really keen that the kids come and see it.
Yeah.
But of course the kids don't want to see it because they started the fire in the first place and they don't want to know that. I don't want to be reminded of it.
But they can't really hide it either. Ashley is intuitive enough with her son that she gets it out of him, because it's not like him to be so withdrawn, so she gets it out of him.
Initially, Ashley and Hayley's friendship seems to be the thing which is going to keep both of them safe. They go for a bit of a swim one night once the kids are asleep. They're nearby, there's no serious danger to the kids. And they do a bit of just floating together in the pool and talking, and then when they both go to bed shortly afterwards, they both say to each other, "Good night, bitch." No, they say, "Love you, bitch." So this is two women who seem to have quite a solid relationship. The disappearances of these relationships are the things that always prefigure bad things happening to characters throughout the film. So the film has this basic message of don't let stupid things come between you and your long-term friends, because you will all at some point need each other.
The friendship with Jancy is really solidified when they arrange to take her to the Disney fireworks. So they can witness parts of the Disney experience from the periphery, because things like that transcend the borders around the area, because it's in the sky high up, so they can see it from a distance. There are sequences that show Mooney and Jancy getting on really well and their friendship really strengthening, but then it might be intercut with a shot or two of Scooty at his window and he's not allowed out anymore. And it's weird because it seems like there were other kids, but then the other little boy they were friends with is gone by then, moved to New Orleans with his father. He's all on his own. They're the only kids his age, it seems, around still that he would have known. The dynamic seems to change, because when it was Mooney and Scooty with Hayley, it was all centred around getting the food from Ashley from the back door of the diner. But then when it's with Hayley and the two girls, there's more emphasis on them being in the room and dancing together, doing different dance moves and expressing themselves. And there's a little bit of that with Scooty, but it's all around the food, whereas with this it's all about the dancing, it's all about expression. You see them hitchhiking together further up the road, and they have this little cake for Jancy and it's her birthday. Again, these transgressive ways of accessing parts of that magical world, and Hayley orchestrating that, finding a way of giving these kids a magical time.
There is quite an assured sense in this film of no matter how poor people get, as long as they don't have antagonism with their fellow poor people, everything will be okay. even though these people have many things in their life that cause them to have these antagonisms with their fellow poor people, there's this little kind of frostings of the poor are okay, so there's no need to combat the structures that keep them poor. Little tiny bits of that. Although at the same time, there's also plenty of moments which go, these people are being forced into these situations and they are doing stupid things because anyone would, when you've been forced into such an odd position. Early on, Hayley's explaining when she's gone somewhere to try and get a bus pass, to try and get some sort of social security benefit, and she's explaining why she can't get work, and it's all quite garbled, but she seems to be pointing out that something unfortunate happened to her that means that nobody will employ her anymore.
Again, you keep getting access to the adult conversations, but through the audibility of the children, so you're not quite catching everything, and it doesn't quite make sense because you're aligned with the kids.
I found myself at several moments going, is there something wrong with the speaker on my computer? Would this have been more comprehensible in a cinema? Or are we just always getting production sound with no ADRing at all, even when that sound is awful? And yeah, it seems the latter is what's going on. It's
editing.
Just keep the audio with the camera at all times, keep the camera around the kids most of the time, and as a consequence what the adults are saying becomes this mumbled mess.
Because even when the camera's at a distance, and it's at a distance from the kids, it's the kids you hear more clearly. The sound is always aligned with them.
Yeah.
The adults don't quite matter. So the adults are cut out of the frame, they're blurred, they're peripheral because it's about the child's experience. It's Mooney is the key. She's the central figure, and I think that really comes through in the close-up when they're having breakfast at the buffet in the Calypso, and she's framed centrally. Her face is the centre of the frame constantly throughout that. It quite literalises that she is the centre of attention. But I find it interesting how everything becomes a hustle, and that's where Mooney starts to get that sense, because she does it on a small scale with the ice creams, trying to hustle people for money to get ice cream, telling them they have medical conditions that mean they have to have ice cream, so they need money from these richer people who are able to buy ice cream for their kids, and then being treated like street rats, to drop in an Aladdin reference there, by the vendor in the ice cream place, getting shouted at to go away, stop bothering the customers. It is a mini version of what Hayley's doing, but I find it interesting when Hayley does steal the bands from the guy who comes to her for sex, the guy who goes into the bathroom even though he's been told not to, and it's found that Mooney's there and that he can't obviously do anything, and Bobby comes through, he protects them, because again it's probably happened before with Hayley or with other people that these men are family men and they have entered into a transgressive transaction of some kind, so he has to just deal with the loss of this $1,700 that he's buying these things, and she sold them for $400. She could have got more, she could have pushed for these 4 bands, this family deal. It's fascinating how she doesn't think about using them to get into Disney, to access Disney, because she's, in a way it's more fun to access parts of it from the periphery, or to scam the people who are going in, because it's almost a political statement of trying to get wealth distribution, actually taking wealth off people rather than accessing the focal point of the wealth. That she's getting Mooney to help her with the labour of selling these things. She's modelling them, she's saying encouraging things to get the people to buy them, she's doing the American have a great day type thing as well. She's becoming a saleswoman as well. Her labour is sending other kids into accessing these rich kid things. There's a message there about the labour of some children making life better for other children. There's probably a real Marxist reading of this film to be done.
This film does not want any aspect of the Disney myth to survive. The whole idea is this entertainment mecca is dependent on extreme wealth inequality. There are stark contrasts between rich and poor happening right on its doorstep, and crime is occurring around the edges as well, because there's so much value in a single ticket just for one day to go to all the parks. This is a film with at least some Marxist credentials in quite some few ways.
Hayley selling her body and entering into the workforce as a self-employed sex worker and using the smartphone technology to facilitate that. But then the fallout of that, because it was kind of going okay, and then because of this guy who she's stolen the Disney bands from, and Bobby having noticed men coming out of her room, probably feeling, you don't see this side of it, but probably feeling concern for Mooney about this. There's this policy is brought in that any guests have to sign in, and Hayley starts to rant and rave. I can't have friends come, I have lots of friends. This whole argument starts with Bobby, and she's screaming at them in their office. They've marched all the way, and there's lots of really dynamic tracking shots, backwards tracking shots, sideways tracking shots from underneath them when they're on the stairs. It's quite frenetic. There's fairly long takes in there that are unbroken, and it has to break when they go down the stairs and everything and then get to the office, and she's really screaming at them, and he's had enough. He's really had it. He says, get out of my office, I'm going to put to 3, and then you have to get out of this office. And so her protests aren't working anymore. It's at the level of the body. Then her level of protest, she's excluded from the space, her voice is shut down, and what does she do? She happens to be having her period, and she takes off her menstrual pad and smacks it onto the window of the office.
So that it sticks.
So that it sticks on.
And Ashley went, why did she just slap a note onto the window? And then I went, oh right.
The note that she hoked out of her pants.
Part of this larger project of moments of uncertainty in this film is that what she does is it's shot from inside the office through the glass as she walks out into the drive-through area in front of the lobby, and she hokes around inside her trousers for a bit, and it's not clear what she's doing, and then suddenly she's spun around and slapping something against the window. It did take a moment for me to go, whoa, did she just get out of her trousers?
It's the pad, and you can see through because it's a bit translucent, you can see through the sun shining in. There's blood on it. When everything else is shut down, she uses her menstrual blood and that luxury product of a pad to continue her protests when her voice and her presence has been shut out.
And I do wonder, are we supposed to think here, this is someone who was just making she was making ends meet through sex work because she had no other means of doing so. She was forced to perform a form of labour which she wouldn't voluntarily have picked. But she's been forced to do that because she has no other way of earning money. She's being constantly chased for rent because she owns nothing. She's inherited no wealth. She doesn't have any wealth to circulate.
She has no welfare either,
yeah, that
it
too.
seems.
So there's no way for her to get her own income off investing herself.
She's messed up her friendship with Ashley, who was promising her a job if she ever gets a promotion that she doesn't seem to be ever getting.
Yeah. Given that she's forced into this position of sex work, for Bobby to then go, all guests have to sign in from now on, is him effectively going, you can't do your sex work from here anymore.
The problem is that the child's in the room. I think that's the concern, rather than that she's been doing sex work. The concern is that Mooney's there when it's happening.
And so, regardless of whether Bobby knows that, we as viewers, well, the implied viewer knows that, and therefore there is some justifiability behind what Bobby is doing because he's trying to make her stop doing it rather than just throwing her out. So he has that alternative. But that's what then leads to her running out of income. That's what then leads to her approaching Ashley desperately, trying to get some money to pay the next week's rent. And that's what leads to her just cracking from all this pressure and attacking Ashley. And then that's what leads to Ashley calling the DCS. And then that's what leads to the climax where Mooney's taken away. So there's that causality that runs through the film and gets more and more tense. It does seem to be partly based on her having no choice, her being a capitalist subject who has no choice, and partly on her having, in those tiny areas where she does seem to have some choice at least, having made bad choices, such as not organising that Mooney goes to someone else's apartment if she's going to do sex.
That's part of the problem, is that she's frozen everybody out. She hasn't got any friends left in the complex. Yeah. The only real friend she had was Ashley, and she's lost her. There's nowhere really for Mooney to go. I suppose Jancy, but then they've already cashed in with that because they've had to go to them the night they've been homeless. I was just thinking, because you said Mooney's taken away, and I think that's the point of the ending, is that she's not actually taken away. She escapes to a free place. It's a bit like the Thelma and Louise or Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kids endings.
She's symbolically not the subject of what she clearly is literally the subject of.
Yeah.
That's why I keep coming back to this. That's 4 miles away. That's more than 4 miles away.
But you have to...
Because the fact that it's shot very differently, and the fact that it's sped up, up
Yeah.
and it's quite juddery as a consequence. Seems to suggest that it might be a fantastical sequence that perhaps it's just happening in somebody's head.
But it's possible it's happening in either Jancy or Mooney's head, or that it's a shared fantasy that they both have. But it is Mooney standing there by way of her tears begging for help. She has no answers left, she has no confidence now in how to deal with this situation. The power goes then to Jancy, because everybody eventually has a breaking point and needs their friend to help them, so Jancy becomes that person. Whether it's imagined by one of them or both of them, I think it's the culmination of the subjectivity that there has been with the children throughout the film, and it could be entirely subjective to Mooney. It's maybe that's what she's imagining while she's standing there crying and everything's falling apart. She's imagining that Jancy takes her by the hand and they run to Disneyland together. Who knows, the film is what it is, and that's what we see, and that's the journey that we're taking on, and so they end up at the Magic Castle.
The thing about that particular landmark in the Magic Kingdom, because it's the Disney symbol, it's on
it's the branding, isn't it?
Yeah, it appears before every single one of their films. The thing about that castle is basically can't go into it. It's built over water. You can walk straight up over bridges into the main entrance to it, and then you go straight through it and out the other side. I think one place inside it, as you're going through this tunnel that goes to the middle of the castle, there is this one place on one side where you can book to eat in there. So there's a restaurant in there, and I think there's maybe one other thing that you can do in there. You can have like a princess makeover. But this entire complex, this big castle, which looks like, oh, that must be a great place to go and explore, I think it's mostly offices. And so the heart of the Magic Kingdom, the heart of Disney World is empty. It's all effectively empty. I even think that the restaurant in there where you can go and eat is tiny compared to the other restaurants around. So it's just a symbol. And it's got a bronze statue of Walt Disney holding Mickey Mouse's hand in front of it, the one in which...
was copied in the Damien Hirst show.
Yeah. So it seems to be there just so that you can have a photo of the bronze statue of Walt and Mickey in front of iconic castle from one of the films, even though it doesn't actually look much like the castle from Sleeping Beauty. So it's the photo opportunity rather than an actual functional thing. It's appropriate that the last shot is not the girls actually arriving at the castle, it's the girls nearly there.
Yeah, nearly there,
off.
and they disappear in the crowd.
Yeah.
They almost dissolve.
The implication, if that's real, is that these girls get so far away from where they live, they may not be getting back there that same day. Maybe it's that they both actually run away from their carers for at least for a couple of nights and become homeless kids. I mean, that's quite a serious situation.
But it's a fantastical sequence.
Yeah.
I would go for the idea that it's imagined rather than it's real, because until then the film has been quite realist and observational. It has edged into documentary quite a few times, and then very suddenly the gear change is extreme.
Yeah.
And then it just stops. It just goes to black with the credits. The sound completely stops. It goes silent, and then gradually I think you hear very, very low ambient sound, and it sounds a bit like it could be a quietish part of the park.
Yeah.
You just hear murmurs of voices and just movement. Very, very low level ambient recording from one of the parks.
It's frustratingly ambiguous for someone who very much likes clear, unambiguous endings, where A happens and B, C, D, E, and F
the
don't happen.
chaos, Shail. Come on.
It's going to take some time yet before I can get that.
Stop being so literal. I find it really powerful, that ending, you know, that she just... I mean, there's that build-up and then you get the cross-cutting between what's happening with Hayley and what's happening with Mooney, and the slanging matches that they both get into with these officials and the police and everything. That cry from Hayley when Mooney runs off, "You want me to help you take my child away?" The idea of that she's packing the bag, she's complying, and then her child runs off in their care, and this idea that she has to help them with that, just to come and calm her down and stop her from running away. And then with Mooney not having the words, her mum has the words, Mooney hasn't got the words but communicates nonetheless.
It was a tense ending in part because of that cross-cutting between the two situations.
I think as well, the quite emotional part where Mooney has been kept away from Scooty for quite a long time, and if she's being taken away, she wants to say goodbye to him because she misses him and he misses them. It's okay to go down to them, but then it's that reveal of Ashley's beaten up face
There'd been a couple of shots previous to that of Ashley post having been beaten up by Hayley, but nowhere near as clear as that
That's really graphic. And then it's Mooney. You go, whoa, her face is really badly beaten. And then it's Mooney refers to it as well. It's one of the rare times when the child is out of the frame because she's too low down for it. And her voice in the off-screen space is saying, Ashley, what happened to your face? Because it wants you to see what her mum has done, and it's a very rare change in that.
Going back to where Hayley attacks her, it is one of those character A attacks character B in an unpredictably vicious way.
Yeah.
It's I'm going to hit you and then I'm going to hit you again, and I'm going to hit you again and again
Almost
and again.
uncontrollable.
It's this kind of I'm tenderising meat as hard as I can kind of violence.
Yeah, she really beats her.
I think that's achieved through two little techniques, and the first is, in addition to having it happen slightly out of focus in the background, Ashley falls down between two beds.
Yeah.
And so what Hayley is effectively doing is she's punching something which is on the ground between those two beds.
Just a
So
pillow or
yeah, two things are being done. First is it's been set up so that there's no fist making contact with flesh or fist having to appear to make contact with flesh. There's none of that. Second is she can punch something and so therefore not have to worry about hurting her fellow actor.
And it has weight, there's heft in the punches.
So she can be really quite forceful. There's another thing as well, which is the Foley sound there is quite meaty. Well, or there's no Foley sound and whatever she's hitting is just like a big steak. That's one of the things about violence is using quite squelchy, meaty sounds to indicate punches. And for me at least that was a sickening, violent moment where the film, in spite of not showing it, managed to make it seem like it was really painful.
In a way, the diner scene is a precursor because there's a squaring up between the two women. The things that Hayley does there, including, mentioned earlier, getting Mooney to have a burping competition, that is quite violent towards Ashley. You know, they've really got her over a barrel, and she keeps implicitly threatening to give the management bad feedback about her service, knowing that Ashley wants to try and go for promotion at some point, and she's working really hard there and she really needs the job, and she hasn't been having a good time. Somebody got promoted ahead of her, that sort of thing. Just really disrupting her working day and ordering all the food, and then it's that act of violence towards the food because she makes her bag it up. What Mooney can't eat, she bags it up, and it's 2 massive bags full of stuff. And she throws it down and kicks it as soon as they're outside. And Mooney can't understand why her mum's done that. Why waste the food that they got for free?
In total, it's quite a medley of moments where people are motivated to do quite senseless things. It's showing how high pressure these people's situations are. And clearly this is several scenes written from the viewpoint of somebody who's worked in the service industry and just is sickened by how much emotional labour is demanded both by the industry and by the customers. It's the symbiotic relationship. The industry encourages the customers to demand this emotional labour of you, such that you have no chance of getting promoted unless you are constantly pretending to be in love with your customers, when selling your labour doesn't mean you have to give that away as well. I'm quite happy about the fact that in general this country is quite legendary for poor customer service. Because if someone in return for a certain amount of money does the work and then on top of that also delivers the emotional labour of being enormously warm and generous and chirpy, that's somebody who's giving much more than that money buys.
That's another hustling for money thing, isn't it? Because they don't get paid enough, so they have to hustle for tips. We don't really do that here.
It's a particularly pernicious aspect of North American service industry, actually, is making it so that you cannot survive on your wages. You have to be frighteningly nice to people, and no amount of money buys frightening niceness, I think, from anyone selling their labour.
I just said a really quick point because, again, second time watching it, so I was more attentive to what was going on in the background and that sort of thing, and signage, what's written on signs, and what kinds of signs you see. I was finding really interesting, so to just whiz through one of the first signs you see, where there's quite a long shot, you can just see loads of stuff going on in the frame when the children are quite small in it. There's a big sign and it just says pregnant ? So it sets the tone actually for there's all these kids running about, they all seem to have one parent or carer. So there's probably more to go into with that, but it's just these suggestive things. The kids quite early on, they're sitting in front of a mural about tomatoes, and in inverted commas says, "Take some home." I don't know what. And
Only metaphorically take them.
Yeah, he's painted on tomatoes. But then I think things like the names of the places, so the Magic Castle, getting confused with the Magic Kingdom, Orange World is where there seems to be a lot of shopping.
Yeah.
That's where they keep going to get the ice cream.
I think Orange World, the building is supposed to look slightly like Planet Hollywood.
Yeah.
And there's a Planet Hollywood part of the Disney complex. It's the kind of environment where, like, from the beginning, I would find it so impossible to live there because there's there's contrivances all over the place, but there's this extra layer of fake frosting on this place, and not because of something anyone's agreed to do, but just because of something they're all motivated to do.
And then just thinking about names of the other projects, for want of a better term, but these hotels that are essentially housing projects. Futureland is where Jancy and Stacey live. The Wishing Star is referred to. Pinocchio. Other signs, I was noticing there was a derelict medical clinic. The only part of the sign, it was one of those towers with several signs in it. The only one left in it just said family practice. So there's just this sense of broken families because this medical practice is broken down, completely derelict. It's on the way to the derelict condos that the kids play in for a while. Painted on the green building that they end up setting fire to there was a gap left in the green paint, and then against the white it was painted 700 BLDG. 700 building, something like that. So it seems like this was something that was half finished and was derelict before it was even completed. I don't know if I'm going in the right direction with that, but I find that interesting. And there was a road sign for Seven Dwarfs Lane.
Well, yeah, that's the thing about the whole Disney area is they've named the roads as well, because a lot of those roads are actually private roads.
Yeah. And another one was Machine Gun America for a gun shop, and it was flashing neon, and it was the words, and then it was flashing with an automatic rifle, one of the digital ones, I think, actually not neon, digital.
If you're a United Statesian who wishes to criticise America's attitude towards guns, and you wish to do that criticism to people outside the US, all you need to do is show it. Just in one shot, just show what the US's attitude towards guns is, and that's it, you'll have criticised it.
Yeah, because it was sort of in a shop where there was lots of shops, lots of different kinds of shops, and you're seeing gift shops continually, or shops that claim to be Disney gift stores, and they're discounted. Things are 99 cents and stuff like that, and it's tat, but it's Disney-ish related tat. It's just using the brand to make more money. That sign was in the middle of lots of different advertising and lots of different buildings for different shops, so it's quite casually. There's a gun shop in the middle of all this sort of joy and childlike fun. It says a lot, really. It's quite cutting, especially given that even since this film was made, how many more children have died in the US from gun violence. It's quite cutting. And I think just a few other things to mention, like the creativity of the kids. So we've talked a bit about Mooney/Brooklyn performing to camera, really. I loved the bit with the whistling into the fan.
This seems to have been a rather painstakingly workshopped piece of drama, but I mean workshopped in the sense of Baker and probably a small team of people doing lots of scouting locations and environments and going, what might the kids be able to get up to here? I imagine Baker going, well, there's this thing I used to do with my mates when I was a kid around fans. Maybe actually this isn't a thing. Maybe it was all done in post-production. What was it? That if you hum into a fan, it chops up the hum into distinct units of sound.
It seems like it's quite specific, because it needs to be hot enough for a fan like that to be going constantly, and for you to be bored enough for that to be something you'd end up trying. It's a combination of quite a range of things. Again, it's this polarisation. You've got kids in rich families going to Disneyland, and you've got these kids in these very poor families or non-families who are finding their own entertainment. The way that small scene is cut. And I think there's a comment actually about, how long have they been here? They've been here all day. They've been doing this for hours, and they're really damaging the mental health of the people working in the office. There's a combination of things going on there. there on a similar vein, you know, when they go into the derelict buildings and they're just actually kind of poking around at first or looking around, they go in and they start imagining having their own bedrooms. Even for those of us who grew up quite poor and working class, we maybe had our own bedroom, or at least we weren't sharing a bed with our mother. The kids really let their imaginations go wild because they start to go, and I would put my bed there and I would have this there, and wouldn't this be amazing? So they go into these really shoddy, derelict buildings that have had squatters in them, and they're imagining all these incredible things. What a lot of us would assume a normal kid would have. It shows up the privilege of so much of us, even those of us, as I say, who are probably working class in this country. And there's parts of very rich countries where working class and underclass kids really haven't even got that much. So it's all part of that same thing. Hayley and then subsequently Mooney can't get out of it. They can't break the cycle. And again, I think this all relates back to the narrative structure of the film, actually. I think it's even on that level. This idea of it having the pattern of how a kid experiences the summer holidays. If you've ever been the kind of kid who's ever been able to go away on a massive holiday, say the English family, Blair, or the dad at least is English, so it's implied that probably the whole family is English and white and wealthy. This is supposed to be, I don't know, but this is supposed to be an unforgettable, once in a lifetime, amazing experience. If it is that once in a lifetime thing, maybe it is so special that you remember it always and you don't remember the horribleness of all the queues, and you're not aware of how much it all cost. When I hear your kids talk about it, they go so often that, I mean, it's very exciting, but yet it seems like a banal experience. So I can't really tap into that. But then you've got these kids on the whole other end of the spectrum who can never aspire to, they can only enter that place through a fantasy, through a dream of it, through selling stuff to other people who can access it, or giving them the access through false means. And so I think that narrative structure, this is what bored kids who have inattentive parents, this is the kind of stuff they get up to. And when I say inattentive, I'm not necessarily meaning that as a criticism, because we've discussed all of the issues with Hayley, so I'm not passing judgment. It's just all of these people are forced to the periphery so much, and they're forced out of society so much, that what's the point in them bothering to engage? Because it seems like when she tried, it was thrown in her face anyway, so she's angry about that. That point's not driven home. I think that's the fascinating difference between the Florida Project and what you see in I, Daniel Blake, with the character who I think it's Hayley Squires plays her. I can't remember the character's name. In I, Daniel Blake, she's in fairly similar circumstances, but obviously in a very different context. But she goes to desperate measures and ends up in sex work because that's all she can do. She has to use her body as a sexual object. Her situation seems a lot more dire. Hayley, she just does it anyway, you know, and of course she's smoking quite a lot of marijuana, but she's an angry person, and I think that stuff probably keeps her fairly even. And actually it's interesting because she really blows up after she gives it away.
I noticed that.
I think so.
Yeah.
Probably need to double check that. When she really starts yelling and she has that real fuck you everybody attitude, she's been off it because she's cleaned out the flat. She's given all her marijuana away. She's angry, she's less even. It kept her calm probably, because she probably has anger issues for reasons.
It's the film equivalent, in having all these very understated elements, it's the film equivalent of a really restricted narration novel where the narrator seems unpermitted, non-permitted to provide certain pieces of information or information about certain people or certain places or certain times. I'm imagining now what it would have been like to watch that in a cinema. Part of the ritual of going to a cinema is, alright, during the next 90 or so minutes, I don't have any calls on my time. I'm going to give myself over to a total immersion in this experience of watching this film. What that entails is, I think, a much higher degree of tolerance of whatever the film does, including just not making stuff clear, than you would have if you're watching something on your computer. And one of the elements in which the film gets I think it participates in a really common thing that films do to get you to ease into that experience is, okay, logo, and then we're going to have just 10 or so seconds of silence with a blank screen, and then we're going to have sound fading up, but no visuals, then we're going to start the visuals, and then we're going to have one shot which lasts a long time. Then we'll have some credits, and now you're fully inducted into this story space. I suppose in that situation, which you have experience with this film and not me, you'd be a lot more okay with the film going, no, I'm not going to tell you that. Or the film going, I might tell you it at some point. Or people to just walk out of frame, walk out of focus, permitting dialogue to be unclear. Of course, the difference could also be that I just get annoyed at when people don't speak clearly in real life. At least I do more than other fellow humans, and so it maybe irked me more. But I could definitely distinguish between the way the characters were mumbling and the narrative process of the film, because there was a sense of care, at least, in the way that it was shot. Like, it was carefully not telling us stuff about certain characters, or carefully not letting them be in focus. Whereas the characters, their interactions were all slightly anarchic, and along the level of, I'm not even going to speak clearly so that I can be understood by whoever I'm talking to.
Yeah, Haley had that slack-jawed thing quite a lot. That was part of the performance. But also, us as adults watching it, we can fill in the gaps that the children don't understand, but it is from the point of view of the children. I mean, if you think back to something like your parents having a fight when you were a child, and the half-heard things, it's on that level. The film is giving you that experience, the half-heard things, the things that you've heard or seen, but you don't understand. I mean, there are shots of the children, particularly after that older man comes along and starts to chat with them, and then Bobby quite aggressively gets rid of him. There's a shot of the children looking on and not understanding what's just happened, but we understand that even though Bobby's reprimanding them for standing on the picnic tables that people eat from, he's protecting them. They don't get that yet. They don't get what he does. And they are quite disrespectful. The way kids are, they're disrespectful to people even though they know that we're the ones keeping them alive. They're just being kids and they're being disrespectful, and they don't, because they're very self-centered still at that age.
I observed just a few days ago that amongst my own offspring, the difference between my 9-year-old who was watching some sort of people falling over and getting hurt video on YouTube and my 6-year-old watching the same video was that my 9-year-old seemed more capable of experiencing empathy for people getting hurt than my 6-year-old, which suggests that somewhere around between 6 and 9, that capacity to feel empathy develops significantly. Maybe it's quite significantly developed anyway, but there's more development to occur, and it's continued to develop during adolescence and adulthood as well. But that's one of the things that does tend to mark children off. Young kids, they do tend to see people getting hurt, or indeed themselves hurt people, and not realise that somebody just experienced quite a lot of pain. This is quite an observant film. Annoying in some ways, but, you know, but I'll give it observant. This is me damning with faint praise, isn't it? Finely crafted, really well considered, brave in the work that was involved in getting performances out of kids, brave just in making the decision to work with kids at all. As we've established, loads of work put into things like location scouting and just picking what you're going to have in the background at any one moment. And plot-wise, it did go somewhere. It wasn't one of these plot-free films. It did actually get into quite an intense human story. I'm giving it much kudos. I don't think that we ought to get into marks out of 10.
No,
because that's not how we roll, is it?
This isn't for evaluation. This is
pure neutral.
We're not really. Not fully neutral, because you bring your own baggage to it, to be fair. And I've had a more deeply emotional response with this film than you have. Then it's natural that I would find it more relatable, because I'm both have been a girl, I'm a woman, and I'm from a working class background where you have none of those things.
I was looking up earlier whether Mary Pickford's parents were born in Canada. She was born in Toronto, Canada, right? So she was a Canadian citizen. I was looking at a piece of film publicity from 1915 which claimed that she was born to British parents.
Oh.
It was a piece of British film hiring company publicity which was implicitly trying to claim that she counted as British. Even though she was born in Canada and was working in the US film industry. I had to look up, really, were her parents born anywhere in the British Isles? No, they weren't. Their own parents were. So Pickford's grandparents were born outside Toronto in various parts of the British Isles, including Ireland.
Well, that's controversial, calling it the British Isles then. Possibly back then, but
yeah, we're talking
I'm just going to call you on your British privilege there.
I'll have you know, this is going to sound so conceited. I'll have you know that I checked this with a citizen of the Republic of Ireland about whether it's okay to call them the British Isles.
Yeah, but one person isn't gonna verify it for everybody.
Yeah,
Which I know I did that earlier with Brazil, but that's a pretty clear-cut case of economic polarisation in society that's not unique to Brazil. It's quite widespread, and this is a bit more contentious than demonstrable fact.
I'm much more fond of the term Atlantic Archipelago anyway. So.
Well, say
anyway,
that.
So, well, yeah, it needs some explaining.
Just
I now need to do.
The islands in this vicinity, one of which happens to be Britain, it just happens to be the biggest of quite a lot of islands. People forget about. Hello, island people, if you're listening. I don't just mean the one I'm from, I mean all of the islands that get left out of these discussions.
I think it's upwards of 2,000
yeah,
islands
I
altogether.
well believe it.
You count the little one. So Pickford didn't count as British if you go look at her parentage. So even though I'm not counting Pickford as British, because her parents are born in Canada, I'm claiming the fact that my parents were not themselves born in the social status that they later achieved later in life, as meaning that I don't count as
I am
class.
being a bit cheeky. I know you do remember your parents struggling when you were younger, so I know I'm being a bit unfair, but still I've got the authority on the other things. That's pretty much all of it. I think there's a lot of issues to go deeper with, for sure. I just want to mention the amount of helicopters.
I kept waiting for the payoff from all of the helicopter shots.
I think it's just they're just a constant presence.
Oh, I suppose I call them helicopter shots. They're not shots from a helicopter.
No,
they're shots of helicopters taking
and it's
off.
the noise of them, even if you don't see them, that rotor sound is there almost constantly in the soundscape. I wasn't sure if it was maybe tourists getting rides in them, or if it was police, or it was a mixture of lots of different things. The kids were waving at them and they were doing the bird, you flipping the bird at them. But I just thought that's worth mentioning in case maybe there's some sort of investigation. Helicopters or something I got stuck on a little bit in my PhD research because there's a lot of helicopters where I come from. So I noticed them. And then I guess just little things. We mentioned the documentary style aspects of it, and we'd probably be clear about that as well. When they were doing the perfume selling, it seemed like it was covert, and the people were probably approached afterwards for release forms and that sort of thing. But it did seem like there was a lot of real people being solicited, and then you get the security guard on the golf cart, and you were saying about these golf carts are everywhere because the places are so big.
They do tend to make the hospitality elements of going to all these many places in Florida look just ever so slightly comical. People get around by driving the tiniest little vehicle possible. Good thing, generally, that they're driving tiny vehicles, although very few of them are actually electric. It was one of many, many little touches in this film which were put in there by somebody having just spent a lot of time observing what life is like in this part of the world.
Yeah.
I think that's why the helicopters were in there, even though they don't mean much to you or I. If you're in that part of the world, you probably know automatically why helicopters are taking off. And I think, judging from experience, it's a little bit like when you go to the Grand Canyon. A big thing with going to the Grand Canyon is paying to go on a helicopter ride over the canyon and seeing splendid views. And I think that the buildings in Disney, because it is just quite a swampy area of the middle of Florida with lots of waterways, I think the buildings in Disney do count as that sort of tourist attraction that you can take a helicopter to go and see. We will never put any money in the pockets of that particular tourist industry in Florida.
No, I don't think so.
Other parts of Florida. I want to go to Jacksonville in Florida.
Oh, that would be cool.
Briefly had a life as one of the first places that companies had an experiment with filming during the winter in the US, when film companies were still based in New York, where you just couldn't film during the winter. Before the discovery of Southern California as a place where you could film most days of the year, they had to go somewhere a little bit closer to home. And initially, it was New Jersey, so just slightly outside of New York. But then when they realised that the weather wasn't even that great in New Jersey, then they had to go at it was the Calum company had to go at doing Florida, so Jacksonville, somewhere in the north of Florida. So I'd like to see what that was like. One moment though I think was quite notable is when Jancy and Mooney, they're eating jam slathered slices of bread, and they're sitting in a tree doing it.
Oh yes.
And that tree, it's absolutely choked with Spanish moss, and that's a thing which you don't really expect to see when you go to Florida, because Florida's doesn't strike you as that mint julep soaked deep south where you can feel the racial tension, but actually it has many of the characteristics of the environment, including Spanish moss. It chokes the trees. That dangling down from the trees is a bit of a characteristic of that environment. So I think Baker went, I'm putting some of this in here. It's all part of that fine observation of the environment.
There's a really nice line there though that Mooney says. She says, do you want to know why this is my favourite tree? And it's the tree they're sitting on that she's referring to. She said, well, it fell over but it's still growing. And maybe that's the moss. It's still growing rather than the tree itself.
Oh,
I don't know. I actually hadn't thought of that. But I just thought maybe that's a nice thing then to end on, is just that symbolism of something that's down and it's broken but it's still growing, it's still cultivating.
One of the more obviously symbolic moments of the film, but with all of the subtlety that it had up until then, I would happily give it a blatant symbol.
Well, I think, but it's a very innocent thing that a child says, so they're not thinking anything deep or profound. It's just, I like this because it's fallen over but still growing, and the thought is no deeper than that. It doesn't hit you around the head with symbolism. It's something that works on you.
Well, I suppose the narrative process of the film is using an overt symbol, but the fact that, the character who articulates it has no understanding that it's symbolic does, it waters that symbolic nature of it down somewhat, makes it a bit more drinkable. Thank you for agreeing to rewatch this film with me.
I love it. This is a film that gives me a lot of joy and hope.
Does the pink DVD case suit, do you think?
It doesn't put me off. In a way, it's like a callback to Marie Antoinette, because that was bright pink, wasn't it?
Yeah. I think there's about 5 or 6 colours of these cases. I think they're officially called keep cases. And with this one, given just how garish the colour palette was, it kind of had to be pink.
It has to, and I mean, they're living in a bright purple place. It has to be those vivid colours, doesn't it? And it's also sunny. Well, thank you, and thanks to your student for the lend of the DVD.
Well, we now only watch films together when I have to, or at least have some motive to watch them because a student I'm supervising is working on them. That's the future of our
Thanks so much for listening. I really hope that discussion was interesting or useful. If it was, please do consider supporting the podcast on Patreon. I also do take one-off donations via paypal.me/PEA Blair, and you can get in touch with us at the moment via audiovisualcultures@gmail.com. We're on Twitter as AVCultures. Thanks so much for listening, and catch you next time.